Sarah Matthews clutched her worn purse tightly as she hurried through the busy hospital corridor. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with the scent of the cheap coffee she had grabbed from the vending machine during her brief lunch break. Her uniform, a pale blue set of scrubs with the hospital logo, had seen better days, much like everything else in her life. She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, checking her watch nervously. She couldn't afford to be late returning from her break again. 3 warnings in 2 months. The supervisor had made it clear that a 4th would result in termination. As a 35-year-old single mother working as a hospital orderly, Sarah walked a precarious financial tightrope. Every paycheck was accounted for before it even arrived. Rent for their small 2-bedroom apartment, utilities, groceries, and her daughter Lily's medication. Lily, at just 7 years old, had been diagnosed with asthma 2 years ago, and the cost of her inhalers and checkups constantly stretched Sarah's budget to the breaking point. Sarah rounded the corner, quickening her pace. The hospital corridors seemed endless today. As she turned into the West Wing, she nearly collided with an elderly man in a wheelchair who had been attempting to maneuver himself down the hallway. His expensive suit and polished leather shoes stood in stark contrast to the clinical surroundings. "I'm so sorry, sir," Sarah exclaimed, stepping back. "Are you all right?" The man looked up at her with piercing blue eyes that somehow managed to be both stern and vulnerable at the same time. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, and despite being in a wheelchair, he carried himself with unmistakable authority. "I'm fine," he replied curtly, "though I'd be better if this place had competent staff who didn't abandon their patients." Sarah glanced around, noticing there were no nurses or attendants nearby. "Are you looking for someone to help you, sir?" The man's expression darkened. "I was supposed to be escorted to the east entrance 10 minutes ago for my driver to pick me up. Apparently the hospital staff has more important matters to attend to." Sarah checked her watch again. She was already 3 minutes late returning from her break. Another warning would be coming her way, threatening the job she desperately needed. But looking at the frustration on the man's face, she couldn't just walk away. "I'd be happy to take you to the east entrance," Sarah offered with a smile, positioning herself behind his wheelchair. The man raised an eyebrow. "Don't you have somewhere else to be?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. "Nothing that can't wait," she lied, pushing aside thoughts of her supervisor's stern face and another warning notice in her file. As Sarah began to push the wheelchair down the corridor, the man remained silent, his posture rigid. The only sound was the soft squeak of the wheelchair's wheels against the polished floor. "I'm Sarah, by the way," she said, attempting to break the uncomfortable silence. "Alexander Richardson," the man replied after a moment, his tone slightly less harsh than before. "CEO of Richardson Enterprises." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Even she recognized that name. Richardson Enterprises was one of the largest conglomerates in the city, with interests in everything from real estate to pharmaceuticals. The man she was pushing in a wheelchair was worth billions. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Richardson," she said, her voice betraying her surprise. "Humph," was his only response. As they continued down the corridor, Sarah noticed Alexander checking his watch repeatedly. "Are you in a hurry, sir?" she asked. "I have a board meeting in an hour," he replied. "One I can't miss, regardless of what these doctors say about taking it easy." "May I ask why you're in the hospital?" Sarah ventured, carefully navigating around a group of visitors. Alexander sighed. "Mild heart attack 3 days ago. Nothing serious, according to my doctors, but they insisted on keeping me for observation. Waste of time, if you ask me. I've been trying to get discharged all morning." Sarah's expression softened. "Heart attacks are always serious, Mr. Richardson. Your health should come first." Alexander scoffed. "When you run a company with over 10,000 employees depending on you, there's no time to sit around in hospital beds watching daytime television." They reached the elevator, and Sarah pressed the button for the ground floor. As they waited, she noticed Alexander's hand trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. "Are you feeling all right, sir?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm fine," he snapped, but his complexion had paled slightly, just eager to get back to work. The elevator arrived and Sarah carefully maneuvered the wheelchair inside. As the doors closed, Alexander suddenly clutched his chest, his breathing becoming labored. "Mr. Richardson!" Sarah exclaimed, immediately kneeling beside him. Her nurse's training kicked in as she pressed the emergency button on the elevator panel. "It's nothing," Alexander insisted between painful breaths. "Just indigestion." Sarah quickly checked his pulse, finding it rapid and irregular. "This isn't indigestion, Mr. Richardson. I think you're having another cardiac event." The elevator doors opened on the ground floor and Sarah called for help. Within moments, medical staff rushed over with a gurney. As they transferred Alexander from the wheelchair, his eyes locked with Sarah's, fear replacing the stern authority that had been there moments before. "Don't leave," he whispered, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "I won't," Sarah promised, running alongside the gurney as they rushed him back to the cardiac unit. Hours later, Sarah sat in the waiting room, exhaustion settling into her bones. She had called her supervisor to explain the situation, but it hadn't gone well. Another warning had been added to her file, with a clear message. One more, and she would be looking for a new job. She had also called Mrs. Peterson, her elderly neighbor who watched Lily after school, to ask if she could keep her daughter a bit longer. The kind woman had agreed, but Sarah knew she couldn't impose much more. A doctor emerged from the double doors, approaching her with a tired smile. "Ms. Matthews, Mr. Richardson is stable now. It was indeed another mild heart attack, but we caught it in time. He's asking to see you." Sarah followed the doctor through the cardiac unit to a private room where Alexander lay connected to various monitors. His complexion was still pale, but his eyes brightened slightly when she entered. "You stayed," he remarked, sounding surprised. Sarah nodded. "I promised I would." Alexander studied her for a moment. "You're not hospital staff, are you? At least not a nurse or doctor." "I'm an orderly," Sarah admitted. "I clean rooms, change bedding, help transport patients." "And you risked your job to help a stranger," Alexander stated rather than asked. Sarah shrugged. It seemed like the right thing to do. "What's your name again?" he asked. Sarah Matthews." Alexander nodded slowly. "Thank you, Sarah Matthews. The doctors tell me your quick action probably saved my life." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened, and a young man in an expensive suit rushed in. He had Alexander's same piercing blue eyes, though his hair was dark and his face smooth with youth. "Dad!" he exclaimed. "I came as soon as I heard. What happened to taking it easy?" "James?" Alexander acknowledged his son with a slight nod. "I was attempting to leave when nature had other plans." His eyes moved back to Sarah. "This young woman helped me when no one else was around. If not for her, we might be having a very different conversation right now." James turned to Sarah, noticing her for the first time. "Thank you," he said sincerely, extending his hand. "James Richardson." Sarah shook his hand, feeling increasingly out of place in her worn scrubs. "Sarah Matthews. I should probably get going. My daughter will be wondering where I am." "You have a child?" Alexander asked. Sarah nodded. "A daughter. Lily. She's 7. "And her father?" Alexander inquired, ignoring the warning look from his son about personal questions. "It's just the two of us," Sarah replied simply, not wanting to delve into the story of Lily's father walking out when she was pregnant, claiming he wasn't ready for fatherhood. Alexander seemed to consider this information carefully. "Where do you live, Ms. Matthews?" "Dad," James interjected. "I don't think that's appropriate to ask." Alexander waved off his son's concern. "East Side," Sarah answered hesitantly. "Near Oakwood Elementary." Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. East Side was known for its affordable housing, but also for its higher crime rates and struggling schools. And you work as an orderly here? How long? Almost 5 years, Sarah replied, increasingly confused by the line of questioning. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. James, give Ms. Matthews your card. I want to speak with her again when I'm feeling better. James, though clearly puzzled, handed Sarah his business card. My father obviously wants to thank you properly, he explained. Please call this number tomorrow. Sarah accepted the card, tucking it into her pocket. I really should go. I'm glad you're feeling better, Mr. Richardson. As she turned to leave, Alexander called after her. Ms. Matthews? Sarah paused at the door. Yes? You won't be returning to your job as an orderly, he stated with certainty. Sarah's heart sank. So her supervisor had fired her after all. She would have to start job hunting immediately. The thought of bills piling up while she searched for new employment made her stomach clench with anxiety. I understand, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Goodbye, Mr. Richardson. As she walked down the hospital corridor for what she assumed would be the last time as an employee, Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes. She had known helping Alexander might cost her the job, but she hadn't regretted it for a moment. Still, the reality of unemployment as a single mother hit hard. Little did Sarah know that this moment of kindness would set in motion events that would transform her life in ways she could never have imagined. Alexander Richardson watched the door long after she had gone, a plan already forming in his mind. The next morning, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, staring at James Richardson's business card while Lily munched on cereal across from her. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the clink of Lily's spoon against the bowl. Mom, why aren't you dressed for work? Lily asked, her observant eyes noticing that Sarah wasn't in her usual morning rush. Sarah tried to smile reassuringly. I have the day off, sweetie. It wasn't exactly a lie. She did have the day off, along with every other day, moving forward. After leaving Alexander Richardson's room, Sarah had received the official termination notice from HR. 4 warnings in 2 months was unacceptable, they'd said. It didn't matter that she'd potentially saved a man's life in the process of earning that 4th warning. Can we go to the park then? Lily asked, her face brightening at the prospect of spending time with her mother on a weekday. Maybe later, honey. Finish up so we can get you to school. As Lily returned to her cereal, Sarah fingered the edge of the business card. James Richardson's direct line was printed in embossed letters on the heavy cardstock. Alexander had said to call, but what could he possibly want? A formal thank you, perhaps, before he returned to his life of luxury, and she struggled to find a new job that would accommodate Lily's school schedule and doctor's appointments. After dropping Lily off at school, Sarah returned to the apartment and began searching online for job listings. Her resume was sparse. A high school diploma, 2 years of community college she'd never completed after becoming pregnant, and 5 years as a hospital orderly. Not exactly the qualifications that made employers fight over candidates. By noon, she had applied to 7 positions, none of which she was particularly qualified for, and all of which paid less than her previous job. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and Lily's asthma medication needed refilling soon. Desperation began to creep in around the edges of her thoughts. Sarah's eyes fell on James Richardson's business card again. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed the number. James Richardson speaking, came the crisp, professional voice after 2 rings. Hello, Mr. Richardson. This is Sarah Matthews from the hospital yesterday. Your father asked me to call. There was a pause. Ms. Matthews, yes. My father has been asking about you all morning. Are you available to come to our offices today? Say, 2 o'clock? Sarah glanced at the clock. It was just past noon, giving her plenty of time to pick out her best outfit. A simple black skirt and blouse she'd worn to job interviews, and still arrive on time. Yes, I can be there at 2. Excellent. I'll let security know to expect you. Richardson Tower, downtown. Just ask for me at the front desk." The call ended, and Sarah sat in bewildered silence. What could Alexander Richardson possibly want from her? At precisely 1:55 p.m., Sarah stepped into the gleaming lobby of Richardson Tower. The soaring ceiling, marble floors, and tasteful modern art created an atmosphere of wealth and power that made her immediately conscious of her well-worn shoes and the small snag in her skirt she'd tried to hide with a safety pin. The receptionist, a polished woman with an impeccable blonde bob, looked up as Sarah approached. "May I help you?" "I'm Sarah Matthews. I have an appointment with James Richardson at 2 o'clock. The woman checked her computer, then nodded. "Yes, Ms. Matthews. Please take the executive elevator to the 50th floor." She gestured toward a separate bank of elevators guarded by a security officer who nodded as Sarah approached. The executive elevator was paneled in rich wood and brass with no buttons except for 50. Clearly, it only went to one destination. As it rose swiftly, Sarah's stomach tightened with nerves. What was she doing here? The doors opened directly into a reception area where another immaculately dressed woman sat at a curved desk. "Ms. Matthews, Mr. Richardson is expecting you. Please follow me." Sarah was led down a corridor lined with photographs of impressive buildings and corporate achievements, eventually arriving at a large conference room. Inside, Alexander Richardson sat at the head of the table, looking remarkably recovered compared to the previous day. James stood by the window, looking out over the city. "Ms. Matthews," Alexander greeted her, his voice stronger than it had been in the hospital. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course," Sarah replied, standing awkwardly until Alexander gestured for her to take a seat to his right. "I assume you're wondering why I asked you here," Alexander began, his piercing blue eyes studying her intently. Sarah nodded. "I was a bit surprised by the invitation. I'll get straight to the point. I've had my people look into your background. 5 years as an orderly at Metro General, single mother to a daughter with asthma, struggling to make ends meet in one of the city's less desirable neighborhoods. And fired yesterday because you chose to help me instead of returning from your break on time." Sarah stiffened. "You had me investigated?" "I never enter any situation without all the facts," Alexander replied unapologetically. "What I discovered was a woman of remarkable character. You sacrificed your job security to help a stranger, even though that job was your only means of supporting your child." James cleared his throat. "What my father is trying to say is that we'd like to offer you a position." Sarah looked between the two men, confused. "A position? Doing what? I don't have any corporate experience." Alexander leaned forward. "I need a personal assistant, someone I can trust, someone with integrity who isn't afraid to speak plainly. The heart attack has forced me to acknowledge certain limitations. My doctors insist I reduce my workload and stress levels, which means delegating more than I'm accustomed to." "And you want me?" Sarah asked incredulously. "You don't even know me." "I'm an excellent judge of character," Alexander replied. "I built a multi-billion-dollar corporation by knowing who to trust and who to avoid. Something about you struck me yesterday, beyond just your willingness to help. There was an honesty in your manner that's rare in my world." James approached the table, sliding a folder toward Sarah. "The position offers a significant salary increase from your previous job, along with comprehensive health benefits, which would cover your daughter's medical needs. There's also a company apartment in a building we own near the office. The commute would be just 5 minutes on foot." Sarah opened the folder, and her eyes widened at the salary figure. It was more than triple what she'd been making at the hospital. The benefits package was equally generous, including full medical coverage with no deductibles or copays. "This is overwhelming," she admitted, struggling to process the offer. "The job won't be easy," Alexander warned. "I'm demanding and accustomed to excellence. You'll need to learn quickly and adapt to a world very different from what you're used to. But I believe you're capable." Sarah looked up from the papers. Why me? Surely there are hundreds of qualified candidates with actual experience who would want this job. Alexander's expression softened slightly. Experience can be gained, Ms. Matthews. Character is inherent. Besides, I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything, Sarah insisted. Anyone would have done the same. That's where you're wrong, Alexander replied. Most people would have walked away, prioritizing their job over a cranky old man in a wheelchair. He paused, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. When I was lying on that gurney, thinking I might die, yours was the only face I saw that showed genuine concern, not for the CEO of Richardson Enterprises, but for me as a person. James stepped in, his tone more businesslike. The offer includes relocation assistance. We can have you and your daughter moved into the company apartment by the weekend if you accept. Sarah's mind raced. The salary would solve her financial problems overnight. The health benefits would ensure Lily received the best care for her asthma. The apartment would place them in a safer neighborhood with better schools. It seemed too good to be true. May I have some time to think about it? She asked. Alexander looked momentarily surprised, as if he wasn't accustomed to people not immediately accepting his offers. Of course. Take until tomorrow morning. He slid a business card across the table, his own this time. Call me directly with your decision. As Sarah stood to leave, Alexander added, One more thing, Ms. Matthews. While I value your compassion, in this position, I'll need you to be assertive as well. Don't be afraid to push back when necessary. Sarah nodded, tucking the folder and card into her purse. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Richardson. I'll call you tomorrow. As the executive elevator descended, Sarah leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Life had taught her to be cautious about things that seemed too good to be true. Yet something about Alexander Richardson's offer felt genuine, despite its unexpectedness. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, Sarah sat on her worn couch, reviewing the offer documents again. The salary and benefits were extraordinary, but it was the photo of the company apartment that made her pause. It was spacious and modern, with large windows overlooking the city park. Lily would have her own bedroom with plenty of space for her books and toys. They would be close to excellent schools and the best medical facilities. Sarah's phone rang, startling her. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Hello? She answered cautiously. Ms. Matthews. Alexander Richardson's voice was unmistakable. I hope I'm not calling too late. No, it's fine. Is something wrong? Not at all. I realized after our meeting that I neglected to address one of your concerns adequately. You mentioned not having corporate experience. Yes, that's true. I wanted to assure you that James will help train you in the specifics of the role. You won't be thrown into the deep end without support. Sarah was surprised by his consideration. Thank you for clarifying that. There was a pause before Alexander continued, his voice softer than she'd heard before. I also wanted to say that I understand this is a significant change for you and your daughter. Change can be frightening even when it's for the better. Something in his tone made Sarah curious. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Alexander chuckled, a warm sound she hadn't expected from him. Indeed, when I started Richardson Enterprises 40 years ago, I was terrified. I had a good job at an established firm, a pregnant wife, and a mortgage. Leaving security for the unknown was the hardest decision I've ever made. But it worked out for you, Sarah observed. Yes, it did. But success wasn't guaranteed. It required courage to take that first step. He paused again. I see that same courage in you, Ms. Matthews. The courage to put someone else's needs before your own, even at great personal cost. Sarah didn't know how to respond to the unexpected compliment. I won't keep you any longer, Alexander said. I just wanted to address your concern. Good night, Ms. Matthews. Good night, Mr. Richardson. After hanging up, Sarah sat in silence, contemplating the conversation. Something had shifted in Alexander's tone when he spoke about courage and taking risks. There had been a warmth, almost a wistfulness, that contradicted his stern business persona. As she finally prepared for bed, Sarah had nearly made her decision. The opportunity was too significant to pass up, not just for herself but for Lily. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting this position would change her life in ways that extended far beyond financial security. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Richardson Enterprises Company apartment, casting warm patterns across the polished hardwood floors. Sarah stood in the spacious living room, still unable to believe this was now her home. It had been 1 week since she'd accepted Alexander Richardson's job offer, and the whirlwind of changes had left her feeling as though she'd stepped into someone else's life. "Mom, Mom, come see my room again," Lily called, her excited voice echoing through the apartment. Sarah smiled, following the sound of her daughter's footsteps. Lily's bedroom was a child's dream, twice the size of her old room, with built-in bookshelves, a window seat overlooking the park, and walls painted a soft lavender at Lily's request. The moving company had arranged all of her toys and books, making the space instantly feel like hers. "It's wonderful, sweetie," Sarah said, watching as Lily bounced on her new bed. "Can Jenny come for a sleepover, please? I want to show her everything." Sarah smiled at her daughter's excitement. "Maybe next weekend. We're still settling in." The truth was, Sarah was nervous about her first day at Richardson Enterprises, which started tomorrow. The weekend had been consumed with moving and helping Lily adjust to their new surroundings. Now, with Sunday evening approaching, anxiety was setting in about her ability to perform in a role she had no experience with. As if sensing her thoughts, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from James Richardson. "Everything set for tomorrow? Car will pick you up at 7:30 a.m. Lily's school transportation arranged. Don't worry." The thoroughness of the Richardsons' planning continued to surprise Sarah. When she'd called Alexander to accept the position, things had moved with remarkable efficiency. The company apartment was prepared within 2 days. Lily's transfer to the prestigious West Side Elementary School was arranged without Sarah having to navigate any bureaucracy. Even her hospital job termination had been handled. Alexander's lawyers had negotiated a resignation rather than a firing, ensuring she could use the hospital as a reference in the future if needed. After putting Lily to bed that night, Sarah laid out her outfit for the next day. A new charcoal gray suit that James had insisted was a new employee welcome gift from the company. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she'd ever owned, tailored perfectly to her measurements by a stylist who had shown up at their doorstep with racks of professional attire. Sarah barely slept that night, and when the alarm went off at 6 a.m., she was already awake. By 7:25, dressed in her new suit with her hair neatly styled, she was waiting by the door. Lily, also dressed for her first day at the new school, stood beside her, bouncing with excitement rather than nerves. "You look pretty, Mom," Lily said, reaching up to touch the sleeve of Sarah's suit. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look pretty too." Sarah smoothed Lily's hair, marveling at how quickly her daughter adapted to change. While Sarah felt like an imposter in her expensive clothes and new surroundings, Lily had embraced their new life with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of childhood. At exactly 7:30, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. "Car waiting downstairs." Taking a deep breath, she took Lily's hand and stepped into the hallway. The car was a sleek black sedan with a professional driver who greeted them by name. He explained that after dropping Sarah at the office, he would take Lily to her new school where the principal was expecting her. Sarah gave Lily a tight hug before watching her daughter climb confidently into the car for her solo journey to school. When Sarah arrived at Richardson Tower, her nervousness reached new heights. Yesterday she had been a visitor. Today she was supposed to belong here. The same security guard from her interview nodded in recognition as she approached the executive elevator. "Good morning, Ms. Matthews. Mr. Richardson is already in his office. Floor 50. The executive reception area was bustling with activity when Sarah arrived. The receptionist, Angela, Sarah remembered from her interview, smiled in greeting. "Good morning, Ms. Matthews. Mr. Richardson asked that you go directly to his office. Down the hall, last door on the right." Sarah followed the directions, her heart pounding. She knocked softly on the heavy wooden door. "Enter," came Alexander's commanding voice. The office was impressive. Corner windows provided panoramic views of the city, while tasteful art and dark wood furnishings created an atmosphere of established power. Alexander sat behind a massive desk, reading through a stack of documents. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Matthews, precisely on time." "Good. Good morning, Mr. Richardson," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Alexander gestured to a desk positioned near the door to his office. "That will be your station, close enough that I can reach you when needed, but with enough privacy for your own work." He stood, moving with surprising ease for someone who had experienced 2 heart attacks recently. "James will brief you on your specific duties, but essentially, you'll manage my schedule, coordinate with department heads, and ensure I'm prepared for all meetings and events." As if on cue, James entered the office, carrying a tablet and a leather portfolio. "Morning, Sarah. Ready to dive in?" The next few hours were a blur of information. James patiently explained the complex calendar system, introduced her to key personnel via video conference, and outlined the protocols for everything from answering Alexander's private line to handling confidential documents. Throughout the morning, Alexander remained at his desk, occasionally barking orders or asking questions that required Sarah to improvise answers based on her limited knowledge. By lunchtime, Sarah's head was spinning. James had left for a meeting, promising to return in the afternoon for more training. Alexander had barely acknowledged her presence since the initial introduction. Sarah's desk phone rang. "Yes, Mr. Richardson?" she answered, having been instructed that only Alexander would call that particular line. "Bring your notepad and come in here," he said brusquely before hanging up. Sarah grabbed her notebook and pen, taking a deep breath before entering his office. Alexander was standing by the window looking out at the city. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Sarah did as instructed, then stood waiting, unsure whether to approach or remain by the door. Alexander finally turned to face her. "How's your daughter settling into the new apartment?" The personal question caught Sarah off guard. "She loves it. Thank you for arranging everything so quickly." Alexander nodded. "And the school? Was the transition smooth?" "Yes, the principal has been very welcoming. Lily was excited about starting there today." Alexander gestured for her to take a seat in one of the chairs facing his desk. "Good. I know my abrupt offer has turned your life upside down. I appreciate your willingness to adapt quickly." As he resumed his seat behind the desk, Sarah noticed he looked tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than they had been during their previous meetings. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Richardson?" she asked before she could stop herself. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly at the personal question. "I'm fine. Just pushing myself a bit more than my doctors would prefer." "Perhaps you should consider their advice," Sarah suggested gently. "Heart attacks are serious, even mild ones." A flash of irritation crossed Alexander's face. "I didn't hire you to monitor my health, Ms. Matthews." "No, you hired me to be your assistant," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "And I believe part of that role is helping you manage your time and priorities effectively. Your health should be one of those priorities." For a moment, Alexander stared at her, and Sarah feared she'd overstepped. Then, unexpectedly, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You took my instruction to be assertive quite literally, I see." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I apologize if I was too forward." "Don't apologize for doing exactly what I asked," Alexander said. "You're right, of course. My doctors would agree with you." He picked up a folder from his desk. "This is why I called you in. I need you to reschedule these meetings to accommodate a medical appointment tomorrow, without mentioning the nature of the appointment." Sarah accepted the folder, relieved that she hadn't offended him. "I'll take care of it right away." As she turned to leave, Alexander added, "Ms. Matthews?" "Yes?" "I meant what I said about appreciating your adaptability. This position is demanding and you're handling it well so far." The unexpected compliment buoyed Sarah's confidence as she returned to her desk. Perhaps she could do this job after all. The afternoon passed in a flurry of rescheduled meetings, phone calls, and more training with James. By 6 o'clock, when most of the executive floor had emptied, Sarah was exhausted but feeling more confident than she had that morning. She was preparing to leave when Alexander emerged from his office, briefcase in hand. "Calling it a day, Ms. Matthews?" "Yes, sir. I need to get home to Lily." Alexander nodded. "The car is waiting to take you home. Same arrangement tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Mr. Richardson." As they rode the executive elevator together, Alexander broke the silence. "How was your first day, really?" Sarah considered her answer. "Overwhelming," she admitted. "But in a good way. There's so much to learn." "You'll catch on quickly," Alexander said with certainty. "I wouldn't have hired you otherwise." When the elevator reached the lobby, Alexander surprised her by adding, "Give my regards to Lily. Tell her I hope she enjoyed her first day at Westside Elementary." The unexpected personal touch left Sarah momentarily speechless. "I will. Thank you." As promised, the car was waiting, and Sarah sank into the soft leather seat with relief. The driver handed her a tablet. "Ms. Matthews, this is for you. Mr. James said you should review these files tonight." Sarah accepted the tablet, noticing it was already logged into the Richardson Enterprises system. Another layer of responsibility. Another indication of the trust being placed in her. When she arrived home, Lily was full of stories about her new school, the advanced computer lab, the music room with real instruments, the library with more books than she'd ever seen. Sarah listened, marveling at how quickly their lives had transformed. Later, after Lily was asleep, Sarah sat on the sofa in their elegant new living room, reviewing the files James had sent. Most contained information about Alexander's upcoming appointments, background on the people he'd be meeting, key points to discuss, potential areas of conflict. One file, however, caught her attention. It was labeled AR, Personal Preferences, and contained detailed notes about everything from how Alexander liked his coffee, black, no sugar, to which car service he preferred, only Winston's luxury transport. The level of detail was astonishing. Specific brands of pens, preferred room temperatures for meetings, even which newspapers should be provided each morning. Sarah was studying this file when her phone rang. It was Alexander. "Ms. Matthews, I apologize for disturbing your evening." "It's no problem, Mr. Richardson. I was just reviewing the files James sent over." "Good. There's been a change of plans for tomorrow. The board has called an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. I'll need you there to take notes." "Of course. Should I prepare anything specific?" There was a brief pause. "Just bring your usual efficiency and attention to detail." "And Sarah?" It was the first time he'd used her first name. "Yes? Thank you for today. Your presence made things smoother than I anticipated." After they'd said goodbye, Sarah sat in silence, contemplating the complexity of her new employer. In just one day, she'd seen multiple sides of Alexander Richardson, the demanding boss, the strategic businessman, and glimpses of something else, a man perhaps more vulnerable than he wanted anyone to know. 3 weeks into her new position, Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm. The initial feeling of being an imposter had gradually given way to growing confidence as she mastered the complex systems that governed Alexander Richardson's business life. Her desk, once intimidatingly bare, now held organized stacks of documents, a calendar meticulously color-coded to Alexander's priorities, and a framed photo of Lily that reminded her of why she was pushing herself so hard in this new role. The emergency board meeting that had marked her second day had revealed the first cracks in Richardson Enterprises' seemingly perfect facade. A major development project in the city's south side was facing community opposition, threatening delays that would cost millions. Sarah had watched Alexander masterfully navigate the boardroom tension, never revealing that he'd experienced chest pains just moments before the meeting began. Pains he'd admitted to Sarah only because she'd caught him wincing while reviewing his presentation notes. "Your medication," she'd whispered discreetly, slipping him the pill bottle his doctor had prescribed. "And I've asked Angela to bring water instead of coffee." Alexander had given her a sharp look but had taken the medication without argument. It was the first of many small interventions Sarah had made regarding his health. Interventions that, to her surprise, he increasingly accepted. This morning, Alexander was in an unusually foul mood when Sarah arrived. His door was closed, but she could hear him on the phone, his voice raised in a way she'd rarely witnessed. "Absolutely unacceptable," he was saying as Sarah settled at her desk and began reviewing the day's schedule. "I don't care what excuses they're offering, Thomas. We had a deal." Sarah quickly pulled up information about Thomas Barton, the head of Richardson Enterprises' legal department, trying to anticipate what issue might have arisen overnight. The calendar showed nothing unusual scheduled for today. The door to Alexander's office flew open. "Sarah, get me the Southside Development file, all of it, and tell James I need him here immediately." "Yes, Mr. Richardson," Sarah replied, already reaching for the comprehensive file she'd organized the previous week. She handed it to him, noting the tightness around his eyes that often preceded his chest pains. "Shall I bring your medication as well?" Alexander frowned but nodded. "And reschedule my lunch with the mayor. This is going to take all day." As Sarah made the necessary calls, she overheard enough to understand the situation. The community group opposing the Southside development had filed an injunction, claiming Richardson Enterprises had failed to complete adequate environmental impact studies. It was a delay tactic, but an effective one. James arrived looking harried, his usually immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. "Morning, Sarah. He's in a state, isn't he?" "The South Side project," Sarah confirmed quietly. "He's concerned about the injunction." James sighed. "It's more than that. The board is getting nervous about how these delays are affecting our quarterly projections. Some members are suggesting we abandon the project entirely." Sarah's eyes widened. "But Mr. Richardson has been planning this development for years. He says it's the cornerstone of his urban renewal vision." "Vision doesn't always align with profit," James replied with a shrug before entering his father's office. Throughout the morning, Sarah fielded calls from board members, lawyers, and project managers, all demanding updates or expressing concerns. Alexander remained closeted with James and Thomas Barton, emerging only briefly to request coffee, which Sarah replaced with herbal tea, and to bark new instructions before disappearing again. By lunchtime, Sarah had rescheduled Alexander's entire week to accommodate the crisis, briefed the PR department on potential media inquiries, and compiled a comprehensive summary of the community group's concerns based on public records and social media monitoring. When James finally left Alexander's office looking defeated, Sarah approached him. "How bad is it?" "The board is calling an emergency vote tomorrow morning. They're going to recommend abandoning the project and redirecting resources to the waterfront development instead." James ran a hand through his hair. "Dad is not taking it well." "But the Southside project was going to provide affordable housing and jobs in an area that desperately needs economic investment," Sarah said, remembering the passionate way Alexander had spoken about the development during a previous meeting. "It's also going to provide less return on investment than the luxury condos on the waterfront," James replied. "Business is business." After James left, Sarah hesitated outside Alexander's door, the summary she'd prepared in hand. She could hear him on the phone again, his voice tight with controlled anger. When the call ended, she knocked softly. "What is it?" Alexander snapped. Sarah entered, finding him standing by the window, his back to the door. I've prepared a summary of the community group's concerns, sir, and I took the liberty of researching their leadership. Alexander turned, his expression guarded. Why would you do that? I thought it might be helpful to understand exactly who's opposing the project and why. Sarah placed the document on his desk. The group isn't anti-development. They're primarily concerned about losing access to the community garden that currently occupies part of the proposed site, and about potential increases in local rents displacing current residents. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly as he picked up the summary. How did you compile this so quickly? Social media analysis, public records, and I made a few calls to community organizations I worked with during my time at the hospital. Sarah hesitated, then added, These aren't unreasonable concerns, Mr. Richardson. They might be addressable with some modifications to the plan. Alexander studied her for a moment. You think I haven't considered the community's concerns? We held public forums, conducted surveys. With all due respect, sir, there's a difference between formal corporate outreach and actually listening to the community. Sarah surprised herself with her boldness. Sometimes people don't feel comfortable speaking up in official settings, especially when faced with corporate representatives in suits. She expected Alexander to dismiss her suggestion, but instead he sank into his chair, looking suddenly tired. The board wants to abandon the project entirely. They see the injunction as a convenient excuse to redirect our resources to more profitable ventures. What do you want? Sarah asked quietly. Alexander looked up, seeming startled by the question. What? It's your company, your vision. What outcome do you want for the South Side project? For a moment, Alexander was silent, his gaze drifting to a framed photograph on his desk that Sarah had never paid much attention to before. It showed a much younger Alexander standing in front of what looked like a small corner grocery store. I grew up in South Side, he said finally, his voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it. Not the gentrified parts you see now, the real South Side. My father ran a small grocery store there for 30 years. He nodded toward the photograph. That store put food on our table and sent me to college. When he died, the neighborhood was already declining. The store closed. The building was demolished to make way for a parking lot that never materialized. Sarah remained silent, sensing he rarely shared this part of his history. The South Side development isn't just another profit center, Alexander continued. It's about restoring life to a neighborhood that's been systematically neglected. Yes, Richardson Enterprises will make money. I'm not running a charity. But we've designed the project to include affordable housing, green spaces, and commercial opportunities specifically for local entrepreneurs. His expression hardened. And now the board wants to abandon it in favor of more luxury condos for the wealthy. Sarah considered his words carefully. Perhaps there's a way to address the community's specific concerns while maintaining your vision for the project. I'm open to suggestions, Ms. Matthews. The board votes tomorrow morning. Sarah took a deep breath. What if you met directly with the community group's leadership? Not in a corporate setting, not with lawyers present, just you, listening to their concerns, explaining your personal connection to the neighborhood and your vision for its future. Alexander looked skeptical. It's a bit late for a charm offensive. It's not about charm, Mr. Richardson. It's about authenticity. These people believe they're fighting a soulless corporation. They don't know they're fighting someone who actually shares their desire to see the neighborhood thrive. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a spark of consideration. Even if I agreed to this approach, how would we arrange such a meeting before tomorrow's board vote? Sarah smiled slightly. As it happens, the community group is holding a strategy meeting tonight at the Southside Community Center. Their leader is Maria Diaz, a former nurse who worked at Metro General until she retired last year to focus on community activism. I assisted her with patient care several times. Alexander's eyebrows rose. You're suggesting I crash a community meeting? I'm suggesting you request a few minutes of their time as a gesture of respect and genuine interest in their concerns." Sarah hesitated, then added, "And I think it would be more effective if you went alone, without the corporate entourage that usually surrounds you." "Alone," Alexander repeated flatly. "Well, with me," Sarah clarified, "someone needs to drive while you prepare your talking points." To her surprise, Alexander laughed, a genuine sound she'd rarely heard from him. "You're either very brave or very foolish to suggest this approach, Ms. Matthews. Sometimes unconventional problems require unconventional solutions," Sarah replied. "The board is expecting you to either fight this through legal channels or surrender. They're not expecting you to personally engage with the opposition." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, considering. "You really think this could work?" "I think it has a better chance than continuing to fight through lawyers, which only reinforces the perception that Richardson Enterprises doesn't care about community input." Alexander checked his watch. "What time is this meeting?" 7 o'clock. I can have the car ready at 6:30. The community center is about 20 minutes from here." Alexander nodded slowly. "Tell James to clear my schedule for the evening, and find out what happened to that community garden they're so concerned about protecting. If it's important to them, I want to understand why." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, already making mental notes. As she turned to leave, Alexander added, "And Sarah? No suits tonight? If we're going to do this, let's not look like corporate raiders descending on their territory." Sarah smiled. "I think I can manage that." After she left his office, Sarah sat at her desk, both exhilarated and terrified by what she'd just initiated. She had essentially suggested that one of the most powerful CEOs in the city abandon his usual approach to business challenges and take a personal risk. If it failed, the board would likely vote against the Southside project, and Alexander might question her judgment going forward. But if it worked, if Alexander could connect with the community on a human level and find a compromise, it could save a project that clearly meant more to him than simple profit. For the first time, Sarah had glimpsed the man behind the corporate titan, the man who remembered his roots and wanted to honor them. As she began making arrangements for the evening's unexpected excursion, Sarah realized that in just 3 weeks, her role had evolved far beyond managing Alexander's calendar and fetching his tea. Somehow, she had become someone whose perspective he valued, whose unconventional suggestions he would consider. It was a position of influence she had never expected to have, and it both thrilled and terrified her. The Southside Community Center was a modest brick building with faded murals decorating its exterior walls. As Alexander's car pulled into the nearly full parking lot, Sarah noticed him studying the surroundings with an unreadable expression. He had followed her suggestion about attire, wearing dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt rather than his usual tailored suit. It was the first time she had seen him dressed so casually, and the change made him appear somehow more approachable, less like the intimidating CEO and more like an ordinary man. Sarah herself had changed into clothes she was more comfortable in, black pants and a simple blouse that reminded her of her life before Richardson Enterprises. She had spent the afternoon researching everything she could find about the community garden at the center of the dispute, even making several calls to former colleagues at the hospital who lived in the area. "Are you sure about this?" Alexander asked as the driver parked the car. It was the third time he'd posed the question since they'd left the office. "Honestly? No," Sarah admitted. "But I believe it's worth trying. These people aren't your enemies, Mr. Richardson. They just want to protect their neighborhood, the same neighborhood you grew up in." Alexander nodded, his expression softening slightly. "My father would have been one of them, you know. He distrusted big business, believed in community above all else." He looked out the window at the gathering of people entering the community center. "He would be deeply disappointed to see me on the opposite side of this dispute." The vulnerability in his voice surprised Sarah. In the week she had worked for him, Alexander had rarely spoken about his family or his past. This glimpse into his personal history felt significant, a piece of the complex puzzle that was Alexander Richardson. "Perhaps tonight is an opportunity to honor his memory by finding common ground," Sarah suggested gently. Alexander turned to her, studying her face with such intensity that Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. "You're quite remarkable, Ms. Matthews. In just a few weeks you've come to understand aspects of my character that associates of 20 years have never grasped." Before Sarah could respond to this unexpected praise, Alexander was opening the car door. "Let's get this over with. Wait here," he instructed the driver. "This may be a short visit if they throw us out immediately." As they approached the community center entrance, Sarah could feel the tension in Alexander's posture. For a man accustomed to commanding rooms and making decisions that affected thousands of lives, this direct confrontation with community opposition seemed to genuinely unsettle him. Inside, folding chairs had been arranged in rows facing a small podium. The meeting had already begun, with a middle-aged Latina woman addressing the gathered crowd of about 50 people. Sarah recognized her immediately from hospital fundraisers. "That's Maria Diaz," she whispered to Alexander, "former head nurse of pediatrics at Metro General. She's highly respected in this community." Maria was speaking passionately about the importance of preserving the community garden. "This green space has provided fresh produce to local families for 15 years. Children learn about nutrition and agriculture there. Seniors find purpose tending the plots. It's not just land, it's the heart of our neighborhood." The crowd nodded and murmured in agreement. Alexander and Sarah quietly took seats in the back row, but in a room that size, new arrivals were quickly noticed. Whispers began to spread as people recognized Alexander. Maria paused in her presentation, her eyes widening slightly. "I believe we have an unexpected guest," she said, her voice steady but surprise evident in her expression. "Mr. Richardson, have you come to tell us personally why your company needs to destroy our garden?" All eyes in the room turned toward them. Sarah felt Alexander stiffen beside her, his jaw tightening in the way it did when he faced opposition in the boardroom. For a moment she feared he might revert to his authoritative CEO persona and undo any chance of connection. Instead, he stood slowly. "Actually, Ms. Diaz, I've come to listen, if you'll permit me." A murmur ran through the crowd. Maria studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We welcome all voices here, Mr. Richardson, even unexpected ones." Alexander made his way to the front of the room, his movements measured and calm despite the hostile glances from some attendees. Sarah remained in her seat, watching with a mixture of anxiety and hope. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," Alexander began, his voice quieter than his usual commanding tone. "I'm not here as the CEO of Richardson Enterprises tonight. I'm here as someone who grew up 3 blocks from where we're standing now." This statement caused a ripple of surprise among the attendees. Alexander continued, "My father ran the corner grocery on Maple and 23rd for 30 years, Richardson's Grocery, though it had no connection to what later became Richardson Enterprises." An elderly man in the front row leaned forward. "Matthew Richardson's boy? I remember that store. Your dad would extend credit to families who were struggling between paychecks." Alexander's expression changed subtly, a softening around the eyes, a hint of emotion quickly contained. "Yes, that was my father. He believed in community, in neighbors helping neighbors." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The South Side has changed since those days, and not all changes have been for the better. And your development will change it even more," someone called out, "pricing out the people who've lived here for generations." Rather than becoming defensive, Alexander nodded. "That's a legitimate concern and one I take seriously. The original vision for this development included substantial affordable housing, green spaces, and commercial opportunities specifically designed for local entrepreneurs." He looked around the room. "But I'm learning that our community outreach failed to adequately address your specific concerns, particularly regarding the garden." Maria Diaz crossed her arms. The garden isn't negotiable, Mr. Richardson. It feeds families. It brings people together. Your company offered to relocate it, but the alternative sites are too small and have contaminated soil from previous industrial use. Alexander turned to Sarah, who had been prepared for this moment. She approached the front, feeling the weight of many skeptical gazes. "I'm Sarah Matthews," she introduced herself. "Some of you might remember me from Metro General." A few nods of recognition came from the crowd. "I've been researching the garden issue today, and I understand its importance to this community. Would it be possible to show us the garden? Sometimes seeing something firsthand provides clarity that reports and blueprints can't offer." Maria hesitated, then nodded. "The garden is just behind this building. We can take a brief recess to show Mr. Richardson what he's planning to bulldoze." The crowd filed out the back doors into the summer evening. The community garden was larger than Sarah had expected. Nearly an acre of neatly tended plots bursting with vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Solar-powered lights illuminated pathways between the garden beds, and a colorful mural decorated the back wall of the community center. "We have 37 family plots," Maria explained as Alexander surveyed the scene, "plus a teaching garden for the local elementary school and a section devoted to growing produce for the neighborhood food pantry." Alexander walked slowly between the rows, occasionally stopping to examine a plant or read the hand-painted signs identifying the family tending each plot. Sarah followed at a distance, watching his expression carefully. An elderly woman was watering a plot filled with tomato plants. She looked up as Alexander approached, recognition dawning on her weathered face. "You're the one who wants to take our garden," she said in accented English. Alexander stopped. "I'm reconsidering that position, ma'am." The woman gestured to her abundant tomato plants. "I feed my grandchildren with these. The store tomatoes, they have no taste and they cost too much." She fixed Alexander with a direct gaze. "What will you put here that is more important than feeding children?" Sarah watched as Alexander absorbed the question, seeing something shift in his expression. He looked around at the garden, at the people tending their plots, at the children running along the paths, and then back at the elderly woman. "Nothing, ma'am," he said quietly. "There is nothing more important than that." The woman nodded, satisfied, and returned to her watering. Alexander turned and walked back to where Maria stood with several community leaders. "I think I understand the issue better now," he said. "The garden stays. We'll modify the development plans to work around it." Maria's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Alexander confirmed. "But I'd like to discuss other concerns your community has about the development. If the garden remains intact, are there other aspects of the plan that trouble you?" For the next hour, Alexander sat on a bench in the garden, listening as community members voiced their concerns about potential rent increases, construction disruptions, and the types of businesses the development would attract. Sarah took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly watching as Alexander engaged with the residents in a way she had never seen him interact with executives or board members. There was a genuineness to his interest, a respect in his responses that transformed the initially hostile atmosphere into something approaching collaborative. By the time they prepared to leave, several community members were showing Alexander their garden plots, and Maria had agreed to meet with the development team the following week to discuss modifications to the plan. As they walked back to the car, Sarah noticed Alexander seemed different, more relaxed, his usual stern expression replaced by something more contemplative. "Thank you for suggesting this approach," he said as they reached the car. "It was enlightening." "You connected with them," Sarah observed. "They saw you as a person, not just a corporate entity." Alexander nodded, looking back at the community center. "My father would have approved, I think." He opened the car door for Sarah, a gesture he had never made before. "We have a lot of work to do before the board meeting tomorrow. I'll need you to help me revise the presentation completely." "Of course," Sarah replied, sliding into the car. As Alexander settled beside her, he added, "This doesn't solve everything. The board will still resist any plan that reduces the profit margin, even slightly. But now you have something they don't, Sarah pointed out. What's that? Community support. That injunction could vanish if the community group withdraws their opposition. The board's main objection has been the delays and legal costs. Alexander looked at her with newfound appreciation. You have a strategic mind, Ms. Matthews. I hadn't considered that angle. As the car pulled away from the community center, Sarah watched Alexander gazing out the window at the neighborhood of his youth. Something had changed tonight, not just in the project's prospects but in their relationship. For the first time, she had glimpsed the man behind the powerful businessman, the son of a grocery store owner who had never forgotten his roots. And for the first time, she suspected Alexander Richardson was beginning to see her as more than just an efficient assistant. The way he had looked at her when she'd suggested visiting the garden, the respect in his voice when he'd thanked her, these were small shifts, but significant ones. Back at Richardson Tower, the night was just beginning. They had a board presentation to revise, calls to make, a strategy to develop. But as they rode the elevator up to the executive floor, Sarah couldn't help feeling that something more important than business had transpired in that community garden, a connection that transcended their professional roles, revealing the humanity in both of them. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the boardroom as Sarah organized the presentation materials. It was 7:30 a.m., and the emergency board meeting would begin in 30 minutes. She and Alexander had worked until well past midnight revising the entire South Side development strategy, incorporating the community feedback and restructuring the financial projections to accommodate the preservation of the garden. When Alexander entered the boardroom, Sarah immediately noticed the confidence in his stride. Despite the minimal sleep, he appeared energized, focused. He'd never looked more like the commanding CEO she'd first encountered in the hospital corridor. "Everything ready?" he asked, surveying the meticulously arranged materials. "Yes, sir. I've uploaded the revised presentation to the system and placed printed copies at each seat. The financial projections are highlighted in yellow as you requested." Alexander nodded, then lowered his voice. "And the other matter we discussed? Maria Diaz will be calling at precisely 9:15 during your presentation." Sarah handed him his tablet. "I've programmed her number to appear on your screen when she calls." "Excellent." Alexander placed his hand briefly on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture of appreciation that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Whatever happens in this meeting, I want you to know your contribution has been invaluable." Before Sarah could respond, the boardroom doors opened and James entered, followed by several board members. Sarah moved discreetly to her position at the side of the room, where she could observe without being intrusive. As more directors arrived, the tension in the room became palpable. Sarah recognized most of them from photos and biographies she'd studied during her first week. Wealthy investors, industry veterans, former executives. These were people accustomed to evaluating situations purely through the lens of profit and loss. James approached Sarah while his father greeted the board members. "Did you two get any sleep last night?" he asked quietly. "The security log shows you didn't leave until after 1 a.m. "Enough," Sarah replied. "Your father is prepared." James studied her with a curious expression. "You really believe in him, don't you?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "Of course. He's your father and my employer." "It's more than that," James observed. "In the short time you've been here, you've become his advocate. It's unexpected." Before Sarah could formulate a response, the board chairman called the meeting to order. Alexander took his position at the head of the table, his presence commanding the room's attention immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for convening on short notice," he began. "We're here to discuss the South Side Development Project and the recent injunction filed by community activists." The chairman, Harold Winters, a silver-haired man with a perpetual frown, interjected immediately. "Alexander, the board's position has evolved since our last discussion. We believe the most prudent course of action is to divest from the South Side project entirely and redirect those resources to the waterfront development. which faces fewer regulatory hurdles and promises a higher return on investment. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Sarah watched Alexander's expression remain impassive, though she had come to recognize the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated controlled frustration. "I understand the board's concerns," Alexander replied smoothly. "However, I believe abandoning the project would be a significant strategic error, both financially and in terms of corporate reputation." He launched into the presentation they had prepared, methodically addressing the financial projections, the modified development plan that preserved the community garden, and the potential for positive press coverage of Richardson Enterprises' responsive approach to community concerns. As Alexander spoke, Sarah observed the board members' reactions. Some appeared skeptical, others outright dismissive. Winters, in particular, seemed unmoved, checking his watch repeatedly as if eager to proceed to the vote he clearly expected to win. "While I appreciate the revised projections, Alexander," Winters said when Alexander paused, "they still show a 15% lower return than the waterfront project. Our responsibility is to the shareholders." "Our responsibility extends beyond the next quarterly report, Harold," Alexander countered. "The South Side development establishes Richardson Enterprises in an emerging market with significant growth potential over the next decade. Short-term profit isn't the only metric by which we should be measuring success." Another board member, Victoria Chen, leaned forward. "The community opposition remains a concern. Legal battles could drag on for years, regardless of revised plans. How do you propose to address that?" Alexander checked his watch. It was 9:14 a.m. "I believe—" His tablet illuminated with an incoming call. Alexander didn't miss a beat. "Excuse me, directors, this call is directly relevant to your question, Ms. Chen." He accepted the call, putting it on speakerphone. "Ms. Diaz, thank you for calling. You're on speakerphone with the Richardson Enterprises Board of Directors." "Good morning." Maria's confident voice filled the boardroom. "I'm calling to inform you that the Southside Community Action Committee has voted unanimously to withdraw our injunction against the Richardson Enterprises development project, conditional upon the written guarantees we discussed last night regarding the preservation of the community garden and the affordable housing commitments." The board members exchanged surprised glances. Winter's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Thank you, Ms. Diaz," Alexander replied smoothly. "I'll have our legal team draft those guarantees today. We appreciate your willingness to work collaboratively on this project." After ending the call, Alexander faced the board with barely concealed satisfaction. "As you can see, the primary obstacle to proceeding with the Southside development has been removed. We can move forward immediately without the legal delays you were concerned about." "When did this happen?" Winters demanded. "How did you secure their cooperation so quickly?" Alexander glanced briefly at Sarah before answering. "Sometimes the most effective negotiations happen person to person, not through layers of lawyers. I visited the community center last night, saw the garden firsthand, and listened to their concerns. Once they understood our commitment to preserving what matters most to them, they were willing to work with us rather than against us." Victoria Chen looked impressed. "That's surprisingly progressive, Alexander. Not your usual approach." "Perhaps it's time for new approaches," Alexander replied. "The revised plan maintains a healthy profit margin while creating goodwill in a community where Richardson Enterprises hopes to establish a lasting presence." For the next 45 minutes, the discussion continued, with board members peppering Alexander with questions about the revised plans. Sarah watched in admiration as he addressed each concern methodically, displaying an intimate knowledge of the project details that he hadn't possessed before their late-night preparation session. When the vote finally came, it was 9-3 in favor of proceeding with the revised Southside development plan. Winters and two allies remained opposed, but they were overruled by the majority, who had been swayed by Alexander's presentation and the removal of the legal obstacle. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, several stopping to congratulate Alexander on the unexpected resolution. When the room had emptied except for Alexander, James, and Sarah, James shook his head in amazement. "I didn't think you could pull it off," he admitted to his father. "The board was set on abandoning the project yesterday." "Never underestimate the power of removing obstacles before they can be used against you," Alexander replied. He turned to Sarah. "Ms. Matthews, would you join me in my office? We need to discuss next steps." Once they were alone in Alexander's office, his professional demeanor softened slightly. "We did it," he said, allowing himself a rare smile. "You did it," Sarah corrected. "Your presentation was perfect." Alexander shook his head. "This victory belongs to both of us. Your suggestion to meet with the community directly changed everything." He moved to the window, looking out over the city skyline. "I've been running this company for 30 years, Sarah. In all that time, I've approached problems one way, with lawyers, with financial leverage, with corporate power. Last night reminded me that sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective." The use of her first name didn't escape Sarah's notice. It had been happening more frequently since their visit to the community garden. "I'm glad it worked out," she said simply. Alexander turned from the window, studying her with an intensity that made Sarah suddenly self-conscious. "Why did you suggest that approach? Most people in your position would have simply executed whatever strategy I dictated." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I suppose because I saw how much the project meant to you personally. When you talked about your father's grocery store, about growing up in Southside, it wasn't just business anymore. It mattered to you as a person." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "Few people see me as a person anymore," he said finally. "To most, I'm just Richardson Enterprises personified, a walking, talking corporate entity." "Perhaps that's because you rarely let them see anything else," Sarah suggested gently. Instead of taking offense, Alexander nodded slowly. "A fair observation. When you've spent decades building a certain image, it becomes difficult to set it aside, even momentarily." He returned to his desk, picking up a framed photograph, the same one Sarah had noticed previously of the young Alexander in front of his father's grocery store. "My father died still believing I had abandoned everything he valued in pursuit of wealth and power," Alexander said, his voice unnaturally quiet. "He never saw that I was trying to create resources to help neighborhoods like the one he served, just on a larger scale." The vulnerability in his voice touched something in Sarah. "I think he would have been proud of what you did last night," she said. "You listened to people others would have dismissed. You found a solution that respected their needs while still achieving your goals." Alexander set the photograph down carefully. "Perhaps." He straightened, his moment of reflection passing. "We have work to do. Legal needs to draft the guarantees for Ms. Diaz immediately. The PR team should prepare a press release about the revised development plan, emphasizing our commitment to community collaboration." "I'll take care of it," Sarah assured him, making notes on her tablet. "And Sarah," Alexander added as she turned to leave, "clear my schedule for this evening." Sarah looked up in surprise. Alexander rarely left the office before 8 p.m. "The entire evening?" "Yes. I'd like you to accompany me to dinner. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Seeing her puzzled expression, he added, "Bring Lily as well. I believe it's time I met your daughter." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Sir, that's unexpected. After yesterday, I think we've moved beyond the strictly professional boundaries that typically define employer-employee relationships, don't you?" There was something in his expression that Sarah couldn't quite read, a warmth that seemed at odds with his usual reserved demeanor. "I suppose we have," she agreed cautiously. "Good. I'll have the car pick you both up at 6. Alexander turned his attention to the documents on his desk, effectively dismissing her. As Sarah returned to her desk, her mind was racing. What could Alexander possibly want to discuss that would involve meeting Lily? And why did the prospect of introducing her daughter to her employer fill her with such a complex mixture of anticipation and anxiety? The professional lines between them had indeed begun to blur, especially after their shared experience at the community garden. But dinner with Lily present suggested something more, a step toward a relationship that extended beyond the walls of Richardson Tower into their personal lives. Sarah found herself simultaneously intrigued and uneasy about what the evening might bring. Alexander Richardson was still very much an enigma to her in many ways, a powerful businessman with moments of surprising vulnerability, a demanding boss who was beginning to feel like something more than just an employer. As she began making calls to implement the next steps of the South Side project, Sarah wondered if perhaps she was becoming something more than just an employee to him as well. "Mommy, do I have to wear this dress? It's itchy," Lily complained, tugging at the collar of the navy blue dress Sarah had purchased for her first day at West Side Elementary. It was one of the few nice outfits they owned, and Sarah had wanted Lily to look her best for their dinner with Alexander. "Just for tonight, sweetheart," Sarah replied, adjusting her own outfit, a simple black dress that she'd found in the back of her closet, one of the few items she'd kept from her life before becoming a single mother. "Mr. Richardson is a very important man, and we want to make a good impression." Lily scrunched up her nose. "Is he your boss? The one who gave us this apartment?" "Yes, that's him," Sarah confirmed, checking her appearance one last time in the mirror. She had applied a light touch of makeup and styled her hair more carefully than usual, efforts she tried not to examine too closely. "Why does he want to have dinner with us?" Lily asked, the innocent question cutting straight to the uncertainty that had been plaguing Sarah all afternoon. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted, "but it must be important if he wants to meet you." At precisely 6 o'clock, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. "Car waiting downstairs." Taking a deep breath, she took Lily's hand and left the apartment. The car was the same sleek black sedan that had been transporting them for the past month, but tonight it felt different somehow, more personal. Sarah helped Lily into the back seat, then slid in beside her. "Where are we going?" Lily asked the driver, her natural curiosity overcoming any shyness. "La Riviera, miss," the driver replied with a smile. "The finest restaurant in the city." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. La Riviera was a renowned establishment frequented by celebrities and business elite, the kind of place where reservations were reportedly booked months in advance and a simple meal could cost more than she had previously earned in a day at the hospital. As they drove through the city, Sarah found herself growing increasingly nervous. What could Alexander possibly want to discuss that warranted such an exclusive setting and the inclusion of Lily? Was he planning to restructure her position, offer her a different role, or was this, as her racing thoughts occasionally suggested, something more personal? The car pulled up in front of La Riviera, its elegant facade illuminated by tasteful lighting. A valet immediately opened their door and Sarah stepped out, helping Lily, who was wide-eyed at the opulent surroundings. "Wow," Lily whispered. "This place is fancy." Inside, the restaurant exuded understated luxury, soft lighting, immaculate white tablecloths, and the gentle notes of a piano playing in the background. The maitre d' approached them immediately. "Ah, Ms. Matthews, Mr. Richardson is expecting you. Please follow me." He led them through the restaurant to a private dining room in the back. When the door opened, Sarah was surprised to find not the formal business setting she had expected, but a cozier arrangement with a single round table beautifully set for 3. Alexander rose from his seat as they entered. Like that evening at the community garden, he was dressed more casually than his office attire, a light blue shirt open at the collar and dark slacks. The absence of a tie and suit jacket made him appear more approachable, less like the imposing CEO, and more like the man who had spoken so earnestly about his father's grocery store. "Sarah, thank you for coming," he greeted her warmly before turning his attention to Lily. "And you must be Lily. I've heard so much about you." Lily, suddenly shy, pressed closer to Sarah's side. "Hello," she said softly. Alexander smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually stern features. I understand you're quite the artist. Your mother keeps one of your drawings on her desk. Lily's eyes widened in surprise, and she looked up at Sarah with a delighted expression. You do? Sarah nodded, equally surprised that Alexander had noticed such a detail. The one you made of our new apartment. Alexander gestured to the table. Please sit down. I've taken the liberty of ordering a selection of appetizers to start, but for the main course you can choose whatever you like. As they settled into their seats, a waiter appeared with a tray of elegant hors d'oeuvres and poured sparkling water for all three of them. Alexander raised his glass in a small toast. To new beginnings, he said, his eyes meeting Sarah's briefly before he turned to include Lily in the gesture. Lily giggled at the formality but raised her glass as well, carefully mimicking the adult's movements. Sarah noticed how Alexander watched her daughter with genuine interest, asking her questions about school and her favorite subjects, listening attentively to her animated responses about the science lab at Westside Elementary and the book she was reading for class. The tension Sarah had felt began to ease as the dinner progressed. Whatever Alexander's purpose for this meeting, his interaction with Lily was refreshingly authentic. He didn't speak to her with the condescending tone many adults adopted with children, but with the same respectful attention he might give to a business associate. After the main course, when Lily had become comfortable enough to ask Alexander about the giant glass building where her mother worked, Alexander excused himself briefly to take a phone call. Sarah used the moment to check in with her daughter. Are you enjoying yourself, sweetie? She asked quietly. Lily nodded. Mr. Richardson is nice. He doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby. No, he doesn't, Sarah agreed, finding herself warmed by this observation. Is he your boyfriend? Lily asked suddenly with the disarming directness only children can manage. What? No, Sarah replied, feeling her cheeks flush. He's my employer, Lily. My boss. Then why are we having dinner with him? Mrs. Peterson says grown-ups only have special dinners when they like each other. Lily's innocent logic made the question seem perfectly reasonable. Before Sarah could formulate a response, Alexander returned, and she silently thanked the timing that had spared her from having to explain the complexities of professional relationships to a 7-year-old. As dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate creation that made Lily's eyes widen with delight, Alexander finally turned the conversation toward what Sarah assumed was the purpose of their meeting. Lily, do you know what your mother does at Richardson Enterprises? He asked. Lily thought for a moment, her forehead creasing in concentration. She helps you with important things and makes sure you take your medicine so you don't get sick. Alexander chuckled. That's very accurate. Your mother has become indispensable to me in a very short time. He turned to Sarah, which is why I wanted to speak with both of you tonight about an opportunity. Sarah set down her fork, her attention fully focused on Alexander now. What kind of opportunity? I've been invited to give a series of lectures at Stanford Business School next month, Alexander explained. It's a prestigious opportunity that I've declined in previous years due to time constraints. However, my doctors have been rather insistent that I need to incorporate more rest into my schedule. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity, Sarah commented, still not understanding what this had to do with her and Lily. California is lovely in the fall, Alexander continued. The Stanford campus is particularly beautiful, and there are excellent activities for children in the surrounding area. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. I'd like you both to accompany me. Sarah blinked in surprise. Both of us? Yes. I'll need your assistance with preparations for the lectures and coordination with my West Coast offices. The university has offered a guest residence on campus with plenty of space. The lecture series runs 2 weeks, with my presentations only 3 days each week, leaving ample time for... He glanced at Lily. Other activities. But what about Lily's school? Sarah asked, trying to process the unexpected proposal. "I've already spoken with the headmaster at Westside," Alexander replied. "They can provide materials for Lily to keep up with her studies, and they agreed the educational value of the trip itself would be significant." Sarah was momentarily speechless. Alexander had clearly thought this through extensively, but the idea of traveling with him, of sharing accommodation, blurred the professional boundaries between them even further. "I understand this is unexpected," Alexander added, correctly interpreting her hesitation. "Take some time to consider it. But I hoped discussing it with Lily present might help you both see the potential benefits." Lily, who had been following the conversation with intense interest, looked up at Sarah with pleading eyes. "Can we go, Mom? Please? I've never been on an airplane." Sarah found herself caught between her daughter's excitement and her own uncertainty about what Alexander's invitation truly signified. "We'll need to think about it, Lily. It's a big decision." As the evening drew to a close, Alexander insisted on escorting them personally to the car. While Lily chatted with the driver about California, Alexander turned to Sarah. "I hope you'll consider my offer," he said quietly. "Your presence these past weeks has made a significant difference, not just professionally, but—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "In other ways as well." The ambiguity of his statement hung between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Before Sarah could respond, Alexander continued. "The board has noticed the positive changes, my improved focus, better compliance with medical advice, more innovative approaches to problems like the South Side development. They attribute it to my recovery from the heart attack. But I know the real catalyst." His gaze was direct, unwavering. "It's you, Sarah. Your perspective, your integrity, your willingness to challenge me when necessary. These qualities have become valuable to me beyond measure." Sarah felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, a warmth that wasn't entirely professional. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Working with you has been educational." A smile tugged at the corner of Alexander's mouth. "Educational. That's one way to put it." He opened the car door for her. "Think about Stanford. It would be a chance to see a different side of the work we do, and perhaps a different side of each other as well." As the car pulled away from the restaurant, Sarah watched Alexander's figure receding in the distance. Beside her, Lily was already listing all the things she wanted to see in California, her excitement palpable. "We're going to go, right, Mom?" she asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I don't know yet, Lily," Sarah replied honestly. "It's complicated." But as they drove home through the city streets, Sarah found herself considering possibilities she had never imagined when she first pushed Alexander Richardson's wheelchair down that hospital corridor. Something was changing between them, something that transcended their professional roles and hinted at a connection neither of them had anticipated. The question now was whether Sarah was brave enough to explore what that connection might become, or whether the prudent choice was to maintain the professional boundaries that kept her heart safely guarded. As she listened to Lily's excited chatter about California, Sarah realized the decision ahead involved not just her future, but her daughter's as well, a responsibility that made the choice all the more consequential. The Stanford campus was even more beautiful than Sarah had imagined. Sandstone buildings with terracotta roofs nestled among ancient oak trees, their branches casting dappled shadows across manicured lawns. The morning air carried a crispness that was refreshing after the humidity of their home city, and the distant mountains provided a stunning backdrop to the academic setting. It had been 3 days since their arrival in California, and Sarah was still adjusting to the surreal quality of their situation. The guest residence provided by the university was a spacious 3-bedroom house with a garden that bloomed with late summer flowers. Lily had immediately claimed the smallest bedroom as her own, delighted by its bay window that overlooked a courtyard where students gathered between classes. Sarah's decision to accept Alexander's invitation had not come easily. She had spent days weighing the professional opportunity against the increasingly blurry boundaries of her relationship with Alexander. In the end, it had been James who inadvertently tipped the balance. "My father has been invited to Stanford every year for the past decade," he had told her during a brief meeting about Alexander's schedule. "This is the first time he's accepted. I believe it has something to do with you." "With me?" Sarah had asked, puzzled. "How?" James had studied her with that penetrating Richardson gaze that seemed genetic. "Before you came along, my father wouldn't have considered taking 2 weeks away from the office, regardless of his doctor's recommendations. He trusts you in a way I haven't seen him trust anyone in years, perhaps ever." Now, standing on the porch of the guest residence, watching Lily explore the garden with the absorbed interest of childhood, Sarah wondered if she had made the right choice. Alexander was currently delivering his first lecture to a packed auditorium of business students, a presentation they had prepared together over the past week. She had offered to attend, to manage any logistical issues that might arise, but he had gently suggested she take the morning to settle in and help Lily adjust to their temporary home. "Ms. Matthews," a young woman approached the house, a folder tucked under her arm. "I'm Sophie Chen, Professor Wilson's assistant. Mr. Richardson asked me to bring you these materials for tomorrow's lecture." Sarah accepted the folder with a smile. "Thank you. How is the first session going?" "Brilliantly," Sophie replied. "The auditorium is at capacity with students sitting in the aisles. Mr. Richardson is quite compelling." After Sophie left, Sarah opened the folder to find notes for Alexander's next lecture, along with a handwritten note in his distinctive bold script. "Dinner tonight? There's a restaurant in Palo Alto I think you and Lily would enjoy. The car will be available at 6 p.m. Sarah smiled at the formal invitation, so characteristic of Alexander's approach. Even after their changing dynamic over the past weeks, he maintained certain proprieties, never assuming, always asking. The remainder of the day passed pleasantly as Sarah reviewed the lecture materials and explored the campus with Lily, who was fascinated by the many sculptures dotting the grounds and the enormous Hoover Tower that dominated the skyline. They were returning to the residence when Sarah spotted Alexander walking across the quad, deep in conversation with 2 professors. Even at a distance, he cut an impressive figure. Since their arrival in California, Sarah had noticed subtle changes in Alexander. Away from the pressures of the corporate headquarters, he seemed more relaxed, his usual stern expression softening into something more approachable. He had even laughed openly yesterday when Lily had demonstrated her cartwheel technique on the lawn of the residence, a rich, genuine sound that Sarah had rarely heard from him. "Mr. Richardson," Lily called out, waving enthusiastically. Alexander looked up, smiled, and excused himself from his colleagues to join them. "Hello, Lily. Sarah. Enjoying the campus?" "It's beautiful," Sarah replied. "How was the lecture?" "Surprisingly invigorating," Alexander admitted. "There's something refreshing about engaging with young minds not yet cynical about the business world." He turned to Lily. "And what have you discovered today, young lady?" Lily launched into an excited account of their explorations, including the really old tree they had found, an ancient oak that predated the university itself, and the awesome robot in the engineering building, a demonstration model that had captivated her for nearly an hour. Alexander listened with genuine interest, asking questions that delighted Lily with their seriousness. Sarah watched their interaction, struck again by how differently Alexander behaved with her daughter compared to how he treated most adults. There was a patience, an attentiveness that revealed a side of him few people likely ever witnessed. "Did you get my note about dinner?" Alexander asked Sarah as they walked together toward the residence. "Yes, thank you. 6 o'clock works perfectly." "Excellent. The restaurant is casual, so no need for formal attire." This was another change Sarah had observed in California. Alexander seemed less concerned with maintaining the rigid formality that characterized their office interactions. His own wardrobe had shifted to khakis and button-down shirts without ties, making him appear more like a professor than a CEO. That evening, the restaurant proved to be a charming establishment with an outdoor patio surrounded by twinkling lights. The staff clearly recognized Alexander, suggesting he had dined there during previous visits to Stanford. They were seated at a corner table with a view of a small fountain, and the waiter brought a booster seat for Lily without being asked. "I thought you might appreciate something less formal than La Riviera," Alexander explained as they settled in. "This place serves the best seafood pasta on the West Coast." "It's lovely," Sarah agreed, touched by his consideration in choosing a restaurant that would be comfortable for Lily. Throughout dinner, the conversation flowed easily between discussions of the day's lecture, Lily's campus discoveries, and Alexander's previous visits to Stanford. Sarah found herself relaxing completely for the first time since they'd arrived, the professional concerns that had preoccupied her gradually receding. After the main course, Alexander suggested Lily might enjoy visiting the restaurant's small koi pond, visible from their table but far enough away to give the adults a moment of privacy. Once Lily was happily occupied counting fish, Alexander turned to Sarah with an unexpected intensity. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," he began. "Something that's been on my mind since before we left for California." Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation, unsure whether to expect a professional discussion or something more personal. "Yes?" Alexander seemed to choose his words carefully. "These past weeks have been transformative for me. Having you as my assistant has improved not just my efficiency but my perspective on many aspects of business and life." He paused, his gaze direct. "I find myself valuing your insight, your honesty, and your companionship in ways I hadn't anticipated when I offered you the position." Sarah's pulse quickened. "I've valued working with you as well," she replied cautiously. "It's more than that, Sarah." Alexander's voice softened. "I believe what's developing between us extends beyond a professional relationship. At least, it does for me." The directness of his statement left no room for misinterpretation. Alexander Richardson, legendary for his strategic precision in business, was being equally precise about his personal feelings. "Alexander, Sarah began, then faltered, uncertain how to respond to this explicit acknowledgement of what had been building between them. "You don't need to say anything now," he assured her. "I simply wanted to be clear about my feelings. At my age, after the health challenges I've faced recently, I've come to value directness over protocol." Sarah gathered her thoughts. "I won't deny that I've felt something changing between us," she admitted. "But there are complications. I'm your employee. There's a significant power imbalance in our relationship. And most importantly, I have Lily to consider in any decision I make." Alexander nodded. "All valid concerns. The professional aspect is perhaps the easiest to address. Richardson Enterprises has specific policies regarding relationships between employees at different levels. The solution would be a change in reporting structure. You could transition to working directly with James or another executive." "You've thought this through," Sarah observed, both impressed and a little unsettled by his methodical approach to what most would consider a purely emotional matter. "I consider all angles of important decisions," Alexander replied with a small smile. "It's a habit of 30 years in business." His expression grew more serious. "The question of Lily is far more significant. I would never want to disrupt the stability of her life or ask you to make choices that weren't in her best interest." Sarah glanced over at her daughter, who was now chatting animatedly with an elderly couple also admiring the koi pond. "She seems to like you," she said softly. "I'm quite fond of her as well," Alexander admitted. "She has your intelligence and something entirely her own, a curiosity about the world that's quite remarkable." The genuine affection in his voice touched Sarah deeply. Most men she had encountered since becoming a single mother had viewed Lily as an inconvenient complication. Alexander, by contrast, seemed to consider her daughter an integral part of any potential relationship. "I don't expect an answer tonight," Alexander continued. or even during this trip. I simply wanted to be honest about my feelings and intentions." He reached across the table, briefly covering her hand with his. "Whatever you decide, it won't affect your position at Richardson Enterprises or any opportunities there. That's a promise." Before Sarah could respond, Lily returned to the table, excited to report that she had counted 27 fish and that a nice lady had explained how koi can live for over 100 years. The moment for further personal discussion had passed, but Sarah felt the weight of Alexander's words hovering between them as the evening continued. Later, after they had returned to the residence and Lily had gone to bed, Sarah stood on the porch, looking up at the California stars. Alexander's declaration had not been entirely unexpected, but its timing and directness had caught her off guard. She had come to Stanford prepared for professional challenges, not emotional ones. Yet as she considered his words, Sarah realized her own feelings had evolved far beyond what she had been willing to acknowledge. The admiration and respect she held for Alexander as an employer had gradually transformed into something deeper, a connection that had surprised her with its intensity. The question now was whether she was brave enough to explore that connection, to risk her carefully reconstructed life on a relationship that crossed so many boundaries, professional, social, and personal. As a warm California breeze rustled through the garden, Sarah found herself contemplating possibilities that, just months ago, would have seemed utterly impossible. The sun was setting over the Santa Cruz Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Sarah sat on a bench overlooking the Stanford Memorial Church, its mosaic facade glowing warmly in the fading light. Their time in California was drawing to a close. Tomorrow would be Alexander's final lecture, and the day after, they would return home. The past 2 weeks had unfolded in ways Sarah could never have predicted. After Alexander's heartfelt declaration at the restaurant, a subtle but significant shift had occurred in their interactions. There was an openness between them now, a tacit acknowledgement of feelings that went beyond professional boundaries. Yet, with mutual unspoken agreement, they had maintained a respectful distance, both physically and emotionally, as Sarah considered what his words meant for her future and Lily's. Alexander had been true to his promise not to pressure her for a response. Instead, he had focused on making their Stanford experience memorable for both Sarah and Lily. On days when he wasn't lecturing, he had arranged excursions to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, a tour of Silicon Valley's innovation hubs, and a day trip to San Francisco that had left Lily breathless with excitement. Throughout these outings, Sarah had observed Alexander with new awareness. She noticed how he instinctively took Lily's hand when crossing busy streets, how he patiently answered her endless questions about everything they encountered, and how his usually stern expression softened whenever the little girl made one of her precocious observations. He treated Lily not as a child to be tolerated, but as a young person worthy of respect and attention. More surprisingly, Sarah had glimpsed aspects of Alexander that his corporate persona kept carefully hidden, a dry sense of humor that emerged during their drive along the Pacific Coast Highway, a childlike wonder at the massive redwood trees they visited in a nearby state park, and a gentleness that appeared whenever he thought no one was watching. "Mind if I join you?" Alexander's voice pulled Sarah from her reverie. He stood a few feet away, silhouetted against the sunset, a paper bag in one hand. "Please," Sarah replied, sliding over to make room on the bench. Alexander sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I brought something." He opened the bag to reveal 2 cups of ice cream. "Apparently this creamery is a Stanford institution. The professor who introduced my lecture today insisted I couldn't leave campus without trying it." Sarah accepted the cup with a smile. "Where's Lily?" "Enjoying her own ice cream with Sophie. They're drawing chalk pictures on the walkway near the residence." Alexander had arranged for the professor's assistant to spend time with Lily occasionally, giving Sarah breaks that she hadn't realized she needed. "Sophie mentioned she's studying elementary education. She seems quite taken with our young artist." Our young artist. The casual possessive caught Sarah's attention. It suggested a shared responsibility, a connection beyond the temporary arrangement of this trip. They ate their ice cream in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, Alexander spoke again. "I've been offered a position on Stanford's Business School Advisory Board," he said. "It would require quarterly visits to campus for meetings and occasional guest lectures." "Congratulations," Sarah replied sincerely. "That's a prestigious appointment." Alexander nodded. "I'm inclined to accept, though it would mean restructuring some of my responsibilities at Richardson Enterprises." He glanced at her. "It would also mean regular trips to California." The implication hung in the air between them. Regular trips that could include her and Lily, a connection to this place that had come to represent a different kind of life than the one they led back home. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked quietly. Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I'm thinking about how different you are here, away from Richardson Tower. More relaxed, more—" She searched for the right word. "Accessible." Alexander's expression turned thoughtful. "I've been reflecting on that as well. These 2 weeks have offered a perspective I didn't expect." He set his empty ice cream cup aside. "For 30 years, I've defined myself almost exclusively through Richardson Enterprises. My identity has been inseparable from my role as CEO. And now?" Sarah prompted when he paused. "Now I find myself considering what life might look like if that weren't the case. If Richardson Enterprises were an important part of my life but not the only part." His gaze met hers. "These 2 weeks with you and Lily have shown me possibilities I'd never seriously entertained before." Sarah felt a flutter in her chest at the sincerity in his voice. "Alexander, You don't need to respond to what I said the other night," he interrupted gently. "I know you need time. But I wanted you to know that my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've deepened." The honest vulnerability in his expression moved Sarah profoundly. This man who commanded a corporate empire with unwavering authority was allowing himself to be completely unguarded with her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Sarah admitted, setting her own ice cream aside, "about what it would mean, for me, for Lily, to explore whatever this is between us." Alexander listened intently, his full attention focused on her words. "There are practical considerations," she continued. "The professional complications, the age difference, our different backgrounds. But beyond all that, there's Lily. She's already grown attached to you. If we were to begin something and it didn't work out, your concern for Lily's emotional well-being speaks volumes about you as a mother," Alexander said. "It's one of the many qualities I admire about you." He paused, seeming to choose his next words with care. "I understand your hesitation. I would never ask you to risk Lily's happiness on an uncertain future." He turned slightly to face her more directly. "But I also believe that at some point, we must trust our instincts about people. I've built a career on my ability to assess character, to recognize integrity when I see it. And from that first day in the hospital corridor, something in me recognized something in you." The simple truth of his statement resonated with Sarah. She too had felt that recognition, that sense of connection that had transcended their vastly different circumstances. "I felt it too," she admitted quietly. Alexander's expression softened. "Then perhaps we should honor that recognition by giving ourselves permission to explore where it might lead. Not rashly, not without careful consideration of all the complexities involved, but with openness to possibilities." A cool evening breeze rustled through the trees around them, and Sarah shivered slightly. Without comment, Alexander removed his light jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The gesture was so natural, so unthinking in its consideration that it touched Sarah more deeply than any grand romantic gesture could have. "Thank you," she said, knowing he would understand she meant more than just the jacket. "Sarah," Alexander began, then hesitated uncharacteristically. "I haven't felt this way about anyone since my wife died 12 years ago. I had resigned myself to focusing solely on Richardson Enterprises for whatever time I have left. But meeting you and Lily has changed that calculus entirely." The mention of his late wife surprised Sarah. Alexander rarely spoke of his personal history. "You haven't mentioned her before," she observed gently. "Ellen was an extraordinary woman," Alexander said, his gaze distant with memory. "She was a pediatric surgeon, brilliant, compassionate, completely unimpressed by corporate power or wealth." A small smile touched his lips. "She would have liked you." "How did you meet?" Sarah asked, touched by this glimpse into his past. "A charity gala for the Children's Hospital. I was there as a donor, she as a reluctant attendee who would have preferred to be in the operating room." His expression softened with the memory. "She told me my donation would do more good if I'd just written the check without spending money on an elaborate party." Sarah laughed. "She sounds formidable." She was. Alexander's voice held affection without the sharp edge of unresolved grief. "After she died, I threw myself into work. James was already grown, finishing business school. There seemed no reason to focus on anything but expanding Richardson Enterprises." He turned to Sarah, his expression earnest. "I tell you this because I want you to understand. I know what it means to build a life with someone, to share dreams and challenges, and I know what it means to lose that connection. I don't enter into such possibilities lightly." The depth of feeling in his voice moved Sarah deeply. "Nor do I," she replied softly. "Everything in my life revolves around giving Lily stability, security, opportunities I never had growing up. Any decision I make affects her future." "As it should," Alexander agreed, "which is why I want to propose something for when we return home." Sarah looked at him questioningly. "Let's take things slowly," he suggested. "No dramatic changes, no announcements, no disruptions to the routines we've established. You'll continue in your role as my assistant while we work with HR to transition those responsibilities appropriately. We'll spend time together outside the office, dinners, weekends, activities that include Lily, and see how it feels to explore this connection in our real lives, not just in the bubble of Stanford." The thoughtfulness of his proposal touched Sarah. There was no pressure, no demand, just a practical approach to nurturing what had begun between them while respecting the complexities involved. "That sounds wise," she acknowledged. Alexander smiled. "I've been called many things in business, but wise isn't usually among them. Shrewd, certainly. Calculating, often. But wisdom implies a breadth of understanding beyond profit margins and market share." "You're selling yourself short," Sarah observed. "The Alexander Richardson I've come to know these past weeks is capable of great wisdom, particularly when it comes to understanding what truly matters." Something in Alexander's expression shifted, a softening, a vulnerability that transformed his features. Without words, he reached for her hand, his touch gentle but certain. Sarah allowed her fingers to intertwine with his, the simple connection conveying more than elaborate declarations could have. They sat together as darkness fell completely, the campus lights creating pools of golden illumination around them. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. The understanding between them had moved beyond verbal expression into something more fundamental, a recognition of two lives that had collided by chance but now seemed inevitably intertwined. Finally, Alexander glanced at his watch. "We should get back. Lily will be wondering where you are." "Where we are," Sarah corrected gently, and was rewarded with a smile that transformed Alexander's usually stern features. As they walked back toward the residence, maintaining a respectable distance but with a new awareness humming between them, Sarah felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from her life for years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and she had no illusions that there would be many. The connection she had found with Alexander Richardson was worth exploring, worth the risk of opening her carefully guarded heart once more. Autumn leaves drifted lazily past the windows of Alexander's penthouse as Sarah stood in the spacious living room, watching Lily arrange her art supplies on the coffee table. 6 months had passed since their return from Stanford, and just as Alexander had proposed, they had taken things slowly, allowing their relationship to develop at a pace that felt comfortable for all three of them. The transition at Richardson Enterprises had been handled with Alexander's characteristic efficiency. Sarah now served as Special Projects Director, reporting to James rather than Alexander directly. The position had been created specifically for her, leveraging her unique ability to connect with community stakeholders, a skill that had proven invaluable as the South Side development progressed. Their professional separation had cleared the way for their personal relationship to flourish without complications. They had started with simple dinners, museum visits with Lily, weekend outings to parks and cultural events. Gradually, these occasions had evolved into a comfortable routine that felt increasingly like a family life Sarah had never expected to find. Today marked a milestone of sorts. The first time Lily would spend the entire day at Alexander's penthouse while Sarah attended a community meeting for the South Side Project. Although Alexander had visited their apartment countless times, this reversal represented a new level of trust and integration in their evolving relationship. "Are you sure you'll be all right?" Sarah asked, watching Alexander arrange the kitchen for the cookie-baking project he and Lily had planned. Alexander looked up with a smile that transformed his once stern features. These smiles came more frequently now, evidence of the changes 6 months had wrought. "We'll be fine. I've studied the recipe thoroughly and Lily has assured me she's an experienced assistant baker." "The best assistant baker," Lily corrected from her position at the coffee table where she was creating an elaborate drawing of what appeared to be a family of giraffes. Alexander's smile deepened. "My apologies. The best assistant baker." Sarah watched them with a fullness in her heart that sometimes still caught her by surprise. The unlikely bond between this powerful businessman and her artistic daughter had developed naturally, built on mutual respect rather than forced affection. Alexander never talked down to Lily, never dismissed her interests as childish, and in return Lily had blossomed in his presence, her natural curiosity encouraged by his patient explanations and genuine interest. "The car is waiting downstairs," Alexander reminded Sarah gently. "Maria Diaz doesn't appreciate tardiness, even from project directors." Sarah nodded, gathering her portfolio. The South Side development was progressing well, with construction scheduled to begin next month. The community garden remained intact, now enhanced by additional funding Alexander had personally provided, and the affordable housing component had been expanded beyond the original plans. What had begun as a contentious battle had transformed into a collaborative effort that promised to benefit both the neighborhood and Richardson Enterprises. "I'll be back by 4, Sarah said, bending to kiss Lily's cheek. "Be good for Alexander." "I will," Lily promised, already focused on her drawing. As Sarah moved toward the door, Alexander followed, catching her hand before she could leave. "We'll be fine," he repeated softly, drawing her close for a brief kiss. "Go change the world, one community meeting at a time." The easy affection between them still felt like a small miracle sometimes. For a man who had spent decades cultivating an image of unapproachable authority, Alexander had revealed a capacity for tenderness that never ceased to surprise Sarah. The community meeting ran longer than expected, with residents asking detailed questions about construction timelines and potential disruptions. By the time Sarah returned to Alexander's penthouse, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the elegant furnishings. The scene that greeted her when she entered stopped her in her tracks. The immaculate living room had been transformed. A blanket fort of impressive proportions occupied the center of the room, constructed from what appeared to be every spare blanket and cushion in the penthouse. From within the structure, she could hear Lily's delighted giggles and, more surprisingly, Alexander's deeper laughter. "Hello?" Sarah called out, setting down her portfolio. Lily's head popped out from the entrance of the fort. "Mom, come see what we built. Alexander said forts need structural integrity, so we used the dining chairs as support beams." Alexander emerged more sedately, though his usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled and, Sarah noted with amazement, he had a small smudge of what looked like chocolate on his cheek. "Welcome back," he greeted her, seemingly unperturbed by the state of his normally pristine living room. "We've been having an engineering lesson." "I can see that," Sarah replied, unable to contain her smile. "And the cookies?" "Delicious," Lily declared. "We saved you some. They're shaped like stars and hearts." Alexander gestured toward the kitchen. "We may have been somewhat liberal with the sprinkles, but I'm told that's an essential component of proper cookie decoration." As Sarah followed them to the kitchen, she noticed other signs of their day together. Art supplies neatly arranged on Alexander's desk, a stack of books they had apparently read together, and a complex Lego structure that definitely hadn't been there when she left. The cookies were indeed liberally decorated with multicolored sprinkles, creating a dazzling display. Alexander served them on his fine china plates, a juxtaposition that perfectly symbolized the merging of their worlds, the playful chaos of childhood alongside the refined elegance of his previous solitary existence. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep in the guest room that was increasingly becoming her room, Sarah and Alexander settled on the balcony with glasses of wine. The city lights spread below them like a carpet of stars, the autumn air crisp but not uncomfortable. "Thank you for today," Sarah said, leaning slightly against Alexander's shoulder. "I've never seen Lily so excited about building a fort." Alexander chuckled. "I must admit, it's been decades since I've constructed one myself. James and I used to build them in his bedroom when he was about Lily's age." A hint of wistfulness crossed his features. Ellen would pretend to be outraged by the mess, but she always ended up joining us inside with cookies and stories. The mention of his late wife came more easily now. Over the months, Alexander had shared more stories of his earlier life, his humble beginnings, his marriage, the challenges of raising James while building his company. These glimpses into his past had helped Sarah understand the complex man behind the corporate facade. "I have something to discuss with you," Alexander said after a comfortable silence. "A proposition of sorts." Sarah turned to face him, curious about his suddenly more formal tone. "What kind of proposition?" Alexander set down his wine glass and reached for her hand. "The Stanford Business School has extended their offer. They want me to chair the advisory board, which would mean more regular trips to California." "That's wonderful," Sarah replied sincerely. "You enjoyed the lectures more than you expected to." "I did," Alexander agreed. "There's something invigorating about sharing experiences with the next generation of business leaders. But that's not the only reason I'm considering accepting." Sarah waited, sensing there was more to his announcement. "I've been thinking about making some significant changes," Alexander continued. "James is more than ready to take on greater responsibility at Richardson Enterprises. My doctors continue to encourage me to reduce my stress levels, and the Stanford position would provide intellectual challenge without the constant pressure of day-to-day corporate management." "You're thinking of stepping back from Richardson Enterprises?" Sarah asked, surprised. Alexander's identity had been so thoroughly intertwined with his company that such a step represented a profound shift. "Not entirely, at least not immediately," Alexander clarified. "But a gradual transition, yes. James would assume the role of COO initially, with the understanding that he would eventually step into the CEO position." He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the soft lighting. "The heart attack was a warning, Sarah. So was meeting you. Both reminded me that life offers possibilities beyond board meetings and quarterly reports." Sarah squeezed his hand, touched by his candor. That's a significant change. Are you sure it's what you want? I've never been more certain, Alexander replied. Which brings me to the second part of my proposition. From his pocket he withdrew a small velvet box, and Sarah's breath caught. He opened it to reveal a ring, an elegantly set diamond that sparkled in the city lights, neither ostentatiously large nor overly modest. I told you once that I believed in taking things slowly, in giving ourselves time to explore this connection between us, Alexander said, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of emotion that was unmistakable. These past 6 months have confirmed what I already knew in Stanford, that what we have is rare and precious, something I never expected to find again. He held the ring between them, not yet offering it, but allowing it to represent the question hovering in the air. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I know this decision affects not just you but Lily as well. But I want you to know that I'm ready whenever you are. Ready to commit to building a life together, to creating a family that includes all three of us. Sarah looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. This complex, brilliant, surprisingly tender man who had entered her life through a chance encounter in a hospital corridor. She thought about the journey they had traveled since that day, the ways they had challenged and supported each other, the relationship they had carefully constructed with patience and respect. Alexander, she began, her voice soft but certain. When you offered me that job 6 months ago, I thought you were saving me, providing financial security, a better life for Lily. What I didn't expect was how much more you would come to mean to both of us. She looked toward the guest room where Lily slept peacefully, surrounded by the comfort and security Alexander had helped provide. You asked me to consider this carefully, to take my time before answering. But some decisions don't require deliberation. Some feel right in a way that transcends logic or careful analysis. Alexander waited, his expression open and vulnerable in a way few people had ever witnessed. Yes, Sarah said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Alexander's usually composed features reflected a joy that transformed him. This was not the stern CEO or the shrewd negotiator, but simply a man deeply in love, embracing a future he had once thought beyond his reach. Their kiss was gentle but filled with promise, the promise of a shared life, of family holidays and quiet evenings, of combining their strengths to face whatever challenges might arise. When they finally drew apart, Alexander kept her hand in his, as if unwilling to break the connection between them. I love you, Sarah Matthews, he said, the words straightforward but profound, coming from a man who had spent decades guarding his emotions. And I love you, Alexander Richardson, she replied, the words feeling both momentous and perfectly natural. As they stood together on the balcony, the city spread out before them. Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a single mother struggling to make ends meet to a woman who had found not just financial security, but a partner who valued her strength, her integrity, her whole self. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, offering to push a stranger's wheelchair, had led to a transformation neither of them could have imagined. Their story wasn't a fairy tale of instant romance or magical solutions, but something stronger and more enduring, a connection built on mutual respect that had gradually, naturally blossomed into love. Tomorrow would bring the joyful task of sharing their news with Lily, whose delight Sarah could already anticipate. There would be plans to make, logistics to consider, 2 separate lives to merge into one shared future. But for now, in this perfect moment, Sarah simply leaned against Alexander's shoulder, her hand in his, the ring on her finger catching the city lights like a promise made visible.